Hey, what I have here on the left is my GitHub repo, and this is a web application. It's a static web app that happens to be written in Angular. I have a GitHub Actions CI/CD set up on this that whenever you create a PR or push to master, it's going to build the code, run the unit test, run some UI automation tests, and on a push to master, it'll also automatically deploy it to production. In this case, production is a static web app that lives in Azure. And this is, live right now at diveintelligence.com. Um, but what I would like to do is I would like to have it every time I create a PR, if it could automatically take the code base in that pull request and deploy it somewhere new up in Azure, and then maybe toss a link in the pull request, allow me to bring it up in my browser and manually test it and check it out. Now, if I'm the developer submitting that PR, that's not super useful because I probably already have it running locally on my machine for manual testing purposes. But if I am reviewing somebody else's PR, that's really nice to just have a link in the PR I can click and go start browsing the website with their version of the code. So I already have that all set up in my repo, so I'm going to kind of demo how it works, and then I'll take you through kind of what I did to get that up and running. So to demo how it works, first I'm going to create a pull request. So let me come in here and maybe modify something on my home page. Find my home page. And there's a title on my homepage that says bug reports and feature requests. I'm just going to add the word foo into there. And we'll put this into a pull request, and we'll call this demo PR. And what the heck, let's get Copilot to generate a PR summary for me. That looks good. Let's create my PR. And on the right, which is the action runs in this repo, we'll see a new actions workflow kicked off. Let's go click into here, into the build job. And this is going to take about 5 minutes or so to run. I'll speed up the video, but we'll come back when it gets down to the lower bits, and we'll see some interesting stuff start to happen over on the PR. Okay, we're seeing some stuff happen here. So I got a comment automatically added to my PR. The application is being deployed to a new preview site. Please wait. And over here on the right, we can see the GitHub Actions workflow is deploying my PR code base to a preview site up in Azure. I'll show you what that looks like at the end here. All right, now the comment automatically updates. PR has been deployed to a preview site. Here's a link. We can click into that. You'll see my site running at some different Azure URL than my production one. And sure enough, my foo changes there. So this is my PR code base. If I go and look at my static web app in Azure, and I come down to environments, we'll see here I got the production environment. I also have a preview environment, PR233, and that's my pull request. So what's happening is every time I create a pull request, it's creating a new what's called preview environment in my Azure static web app. This is just a hobby project for me, so I'm on the free plan for my static web app. It's completely free as far as I'm aware. The paid plan, I think, is like $12 to $15 a month or something. But for the free plan, you get up to 3 preview environments. With the paid plan, you get 10. I'm not sure if there's a way to pay for more than 10, but that's my understanding of how it works right now. I come back to my PR here. My build over there on the right is finished. Now, if I were to push a new commit to this PR, that same workflow will kick off again. It will redeploy to the same preview site. This comment the date and time will be updated, and that all works good. What's also key though is when I'm done with my PR and I merge it into master, or I just close it if I choose not to merge it, the workflow will also come and kind of clean up that preview environment as soon as the PR is merged or closed. So I don't want to merge my foo change, so I'm just going to close the PR. I come up and I look at the GitHub Actions here. I see pull request 233 closed. It's running the other job here, which I've called delete preview site. as you would expect, this is going to come and delete that preview site in my Azure static web app. The comment will update, say, hey, it's being deleted. And once it's done, it'll tell me it has been deleted. There we go. Comments updated, the preview site has been deleted. If I go look in Azure and refresh the page here, I should see that the PR environment is gone. Great, so let's look at how I set that all up. So most of the work happens in my GitHub Actions YAML file. So let's go take a look at that. It's a bit bigger. So here's my ci.yaml file. I'll put the link to the repo in the video description. This is all open source. It's just one of my hobby projects. I got two jobs, a build job and a delete preview site job. But before we even get into the jobs, let's look at my triggers. So this is common to see. I trigger this anytime I push to master. I also trigger it anytime I have a pull request targeting master. Workflow dispatch just allows me to manually trigger it. What's not common to see is I have this types filter on the pull request trigger. If you don't have this line in here, by default, it will only trigger on PR events opened, reopened, and synchronized. Synchronized, I think, just means there is a new commit push to the PR branch. But by default, it will not trigger on a PR closed event. But we need it to trigger on a PR closed event because that's where we do our environment cleanup. So I had to be explicit about what PR event types I want to trigger this. I have a build job and a delete preview site job. So let's look at what's going on in some of these jobs. Actually, let's talk about the conditions first. In the delete preview site, I have an if statement here that basically says if it's a pull request and the action is closed, then run this cleanup job. Only run it when it's a closed PR event. And the if condition for my build job is effectively the opposite. Run it on everything that is not a closed PR event. I specified the explicit permissions, which is always a good practice when you're doing GitHub Actions workflows. The important bit for this first job is pull requests write, because I'm going to be adding some comments and editing PR comments, so I need that permission in order to do that. The first chunk of my job here is just building my npm install, building my code, running some code QL scans, running some UI automation tests, using Playwright here, which I recently adopted, which is pretty slick. I like Playwright a lot. If I get down here, this is my deploy to production steps, which only run on pushes to master, which we're not going to be looking at right now. And then this section is my deploy to preview site stuff. This is the interesting bits. So I'm using some actions from Peter Evans, find comments, and create or update comments to do the PR commenting. And the first step here basically goes to see, is there an existing PR comment that I'm going to update? This is kind of relevant when you're pushing a second or third commit to the same PR. We don't want to start creating new comments, so we'll just find if there's a pre-existing comment, and it'll store the ID and the output from the step. And then we're going to either update that comment if it exists or create a new comment saying, the application is being deployed. And then we are going to actually do the deployment. And the way this step works is I'm calling an npm run task called deploy. We'll look at that in a second. Okay, let's look at it now. It's basically the same exact way I deploy to production, just with one extra argument. I look at my deploy to production, which is right here. The only thing different is for production, I'm saying --env production. And in this one, I'm doing --env, and I'm giving it the PR, and then the number of my PR. And the npm run deploy is actually running this command here. SWA is the static web app CLI that Azure provides. Is different than the Azure, the AZ CLI. There's a dedicated one for static web apps. I'm just going to deploy the folder where I build my code into and then pass the couple extra arguments. Deployment token is how you authenticate. So in your static web app in Azure, if you click this manage deployment token here, it'll give you a deployment token to use. I'm not going to click that because I don't want to leak mine. And when you deploy to the environment PR, some number, if that environment doesn't already exist, it will create it. And if it does already exist, it'll just deploy over top of it. And then I'm just going to update the comment that says, hey, it's been deployed, and this is the URL. The way I got this URL, which was like some kind of random number in there, is the first time I did it, I basically just manually deployed a preview environment and took a look at what the URL was under browse and saw where the PR bit came into it. Or I can just hover over the browse here, and if you look at the very bottom left of the browser window, you'll kind of see the kind-beach-03c URL. So you just got to kind of figure out what, I'm hoping that URL doesn't change for the life of my static web app resource in Azure. And the only thing that changes in it is the PR number. I toss that in there. And then I am actually running UI automation tests, Playwright automation tests against my newly deployed preview site. I actually also run Playwright tests earlier in this build across the local copy of my website. That's probably overkill. I probably don't need to do that twice. That's a future change, though. So that's deploying it, creating a new site or deploying a new commit to a PR. And then the last job in here is deleting the preview site. And this was actually a bit trickier. So it was trickier because the SWA CLI that we use to deploy, as far as I can tell, it doesn't have any commands to allow you to delete an environment. However, the Azure CLI, the AZ CLI, does have commands to let you delete the environment. So that's what I had to use. And with the SWA CLI, I could use that deployment token to authenticate. This guy here. But with the Azure CLI, that's not an option. And there are a few options for how to authenticate with the Azure CLI. But kind of probably the best practice nowadays, especially from a GitHub Actions workflow, is to use what's called OIDC, OpenID Connect. And that is kind of a secretless way to authenticate to Azure from your GitHub Actions workflow. Now, if you're looking closely at my workflow here, you may see I have a few secrets here in my Azure login. And while I have configured these as GitHub repo secrets, these three values actually aren't really secrets. My subscription ID, that's not really a secret. Tenant ID, right, my Azure AD tenant ID, that's not a secret. Client ID, that's basically a username. Normally, you might expect to see a fourth one that's called client secret, and that is the secret. That's basically the password. But I'm not using a client secret or any real secrets here. So I'm going to show you how I set that up and configured it to work. And then for the delete, we're finding the comment to update again. We're going to update it and say, hey, the delete's in progress. Here's where we do the actual delete. We're running an Azure CLI command, AZ static web app environment delete. We give it the name of my static web app in Azure, the environment name, which is PR, whatever the PR number is, the resource group name, and then -- yes, just to tell it, don't prompt me, say yes to any prompts. And then updating the comment. Now, the tricky part about getting all this to work was setting up like the OIDC permissions so that this command would just work. And the way that I did that is first I have to go and create a service principal in Azure. So I got to go to Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory, AAD. And I'm going to create a service principal, which it calls app registrations, which has always confused me. And I'm going to create a new registration. I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it demo service principal. And we'll leave the default options. We'll register that. And then we got to do a few things. We got to grant that service principal the proper permissions it needs to delete my static web app environment. And we got to set up the OIDC connection with GitHub. So let's do the OIDC bit first. So you come to certificates and secrets on my service principal, federated credentials. Let's add a credential. And let's choose GitHub Actions deploying Azure resources. And then let's put in some of my information. This is just my personal org, Dylan Smith. My GitHub repo name is Dive Intelligence. And then kind of what is the source? I can give it a specific branch and a specific branch name that my workflows need to run from, or a specific GitHub environment name. For my scenario, I'm just going to say pull requests. And so let's give it a name. I'll call it, I don't know, demo GitHub OIDC. And what's going to happen here is when my GitHub Actions workflow tries to log into Azure, GitHub and Azure are going to do some kind of handshake. And GitHub is basically going to tell Azure, these workflow requests are coming from this workflow in this repo triggered by a PR. Trust me, I'm GitHub, I know that's true. And then Azure is going to say, oh great, it just so happens I have a service principal that's configured to be used anytime a GitHub Actions workflow from that org, from that repo, on a pull request event gets run. So I'm going to allow anything coming from that workflow run to use this service principal to do its work. The workflow run itself doesn't actually need to give any kind of credentials or passwords or secrets, as long as I've configured what I'm configuring right now. All right. So now OIDC is set up. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to grant the service principal the permissions it needs to be able to delete an environment. And there's not great docs on this. In fact, I couldn't find any docs on what permissions you need to run that command. So I just kind of figured it out by trial and error. So this is a command here. So I learned after a bit of trial and error, it needs two things in order for this to succeed. The first one is fairly obvious. The second one, not so much. So the first thing I need to give it is I need to go to my static web app, and I'm going to give it contributor access to the static web app. So I'm going to say role assignments. I'm going to add a role assignment. That's not good. I'm going to say privileged administrator roles. I'm going to pick contributor. Next. And let's pick my service principal. And I just called this demo something, demo service principal. Okay. There we go. That's not quite enough. That would probably be enough for it to issue the delete environment command, but the Azure CLI will still fail, because what I'm assuming it does is it tells Azure go and delete the environment, and then it probably pulls the operation waiting until it's actually done deleting the environment. And polling the operation to see if it's done needs another permission. And it's not a permission on the static web app. It's actually a permission on the subscription that static web app lives in. So I'm going to come to my subscription here, and I'm going to go to access control. And I'm going to need to create a custom role. Maybe there is a pre-existing role that already has this permission, but there's a lot of roles on the subscription, and I didn't want to wade through it. I know exactly which permission I need, so I'm just going to create a custom role. And for this purpose, I'm just going to call it demo custom role. I'm going to say start from scratch. And the reason I know exactly what permission I need is because when I ran the delete command without this permission, the error message told me exactly which permission I was missing. So that's nice. And it was a Microsoft.web permission. If I remember correctly, it was /locations /something. Did I spell that wrong? What? Microsoft.web. Did we put the wrong slash in there? Yes, I did. Locations, operation results, read. This is what it needs. So I'm going to add that permission to my custom role. Let's review and create that custom role. And now I'm going to assign that custom role I just created to my service principal. And I do that. Where do I do that? Really right here, add role assignment. And I call this demo custom role. We will assign this to my demo service principal. And that should be it. I don't know why that keeps happening. And now this workflow should have everything it needs to run. So I think it's everything. Feel free to go and copy my YAML if you want to do something similar on your repo. I found this works pretty awesome. I'm pretty happy with how this is running.